Not every free agent signing needs to necessarily be a home run. I think sometimes the most important thing to get when you're getting a guy in free agency is a guy that is a solid fit, that brings something that you need to the table at a reasonable price for all parties involved. I think ultimately, and this is something that goes back to my time in the car business, ultimately, a good deal is a deal that both parties not only have agreed to, but both parties can be happy with. And I look at the Pacers signing of Monta Ellis as a solid move. One of those type of mutually beneficial types of arrangements where both parties can walk out of this deal feeling good about what they're getting out of it. Now, when we look at Monta Ellis, we're talking about a guy that's a relatively proven commodity in the NBA. Yes, he's a player with his flaws that people like to talk about, but sometimes I think when it comes to NBA players, and athletes in general, oftentimes we focus too much on what they can't do and sometimes not enough on the positives of what they can do and what they can bring to the table. When I look at a guy like Monta Ellis, I'm talking about a guy that's played 80 plus games in each of the past 3 seasons. He's been a guy that's been able to stay relatively healthy throughout most of his NBA career. He's had his issues, sure, but for the most part, he's been a healthy, reliable type of performer, a career 19 point per game scorer. And you could sit there and say this and that about a guy like Monta Ellis putting up those type of numbers, but he's not doing it on a team like the Philadelphia 76ers or the New York Knicks. He's done it on some okay or at least solid teams, and that means something. So it's not every 19 point per game average is the same, and Monta Ellis's 19 points per game isn't that bad. And you look back at this past season, he averaged 18.9 points per game, and I thought he played really, really well in that opening round series 5-game loss to the Houston Rockets. He averaged over 25 points a game. I thought he played with an aggressiveness that I didn't expect from him. I thought he played well in the big spot, even though his team wasn't doing well, especially when he had to be dealt the handicap of playing in the same backcourt as Rondo. I mean, there are things that a Monta Ellis brings to the table that can be a positive for an organization. While he's not a 6'6", 6'7", guard, he's not really a good defender. At times, he can be a bit selfish, a bit shot happy, and he can forget about the offense. Here is a guy that when he's on the right trajectory and on the right path, he is a guy that sometimes can put forth some defensive effort, which is reflected in his steals per game average throughout his career. Here's a guy that can, especially when he's in a good rhythm, be a threat from the outside, even though his career three-point percentage might not suggest it. He's a bit of a volume shooter, but he is a guy that can help you space the floor. He's a guy, most importantly of all, can create his own shot for himself and potentially also create opportunities for others off the dribble. A guy that runs in transition really well. There are things offensively that you really like about a guy like Monta Ellis. He's a guy that's not afraid of taking shots, and there's something to be said about that too. A guy that's confident in himself, and even when he is struggling, will continue to go after it, which again sometimes can be bad, but sometimes can be good as well. And I look at him being a guy that won't turn 30 until October. Yes, he has a lot of NBA mileage on his body since he came into the league as such a young player. But he's a guy that you can expect in a 3, 4, 5-year type of contract situation will pretty much produce at a similar level to what he has done throughout recent years of his career. So you're not necessarily just paying for past production, you're paying for current and future production at a certain rate. And when I look at this deal for the Indiana Pacers, they gave him 4 years and $44 million. And from Monta Ellis' standpoint, you could maybe say he was going to get a little bit more money. I know it's been reported that the Kings offered him 48 over 4, but he got a solid number. He has to understand that he has a bit of a reputation and somewhat earned. He has to look at some of the limitations that he has and say that maybe he did deserve a little bit more based on especially off of what some other people are getting paid. But this was probably going to be about the best that he could get. He still got paid quite a bit of money, but at the same point in time, he was smart enough to recognize Sacramento was a horrible situation. Indiana, with Larry Bird running the show, isn't that bad of a situation. small market type of team where I can go in and I can contribute without having the major media pressure in certain other markets. I can go into the Eastern Conference, which means I can be on a playoff team and maybe go a little farther in the playoffs than I would if I was still with, let's say, the Dallas Mavericks. I mean, you look at a guy like Monta Ellis, his 4-year, $44 million contract makes some sense for him. It gives him a big payday until he gets to the age of 33, which at that point in time, he might be able to get one more decent length 2 or 3 year contract at that time. And then from the Indiana Pacers standpoint, here's what you get. You get a legit number 2 option to play alongside PG-13. You get a 2 guard, kind of combo guard, with some point skills, but really more so offensively a 2 guard, with the skills and game fit that are very good next to their point guard, George Hill, a point guard at 6'3" with some size that is solid on the defensive end. So the fit makes some sense here, where George Hill brings some positives to the table, Monta Ellis brings some different positives to the table. And for a team like the Indiana Pacers that needed some more offensive punch on the perimeter, they got it here in a guy like Monta Ellis. And maybe in a good situation, maybe he will put in a little more consistent effort on the defensive end. Maybe he will blend a little bit better coming into a situation where it's established that PG-13 is the man, similar to what happened in Dallas when he got to Dallas. I don't think he was as bad as people made him out to be. He knew that Dirk was still going to be the man and everything else like that. But, you look at this deal for the Indiana Pacers. Again, $11 million a year for a guy that can average 19 points per game is a pretty good contract. It's a really good contract. And this contract will look even better in the grand scheme of things when you see how much the salary cap is going to increase over the next couple of years. And you're going to see just how much players of lesser levels of Monta Ellis are going to get paid going forward. This is also potentially a contract that if things don't go that well or Indiana decides to fully kick into a rebuild mode around PG-13, they can sit there and potentially move this contract if they needed to, because at $11 million a year, especially again in 2-3 years, when the salary cap climate of the NBA is entirely different, this contract is not going to be as bad because there will still be a team, especially if it's a contending team, and if they have the space and flexibility to be able to do it, could bring in a guy like a Monta Ellis potentially in a trade and be able to justify it to themselves. So it's a good contract. It has flexibility. Furthermore, this contract will look even better once Roy Hibbert's contract comes off of the books after the 15-16 season, because now Indiana is going to have some salary cap space that they didn't have before, because they're not paying a whole shit ton of money to a guy like Roy Hibbert, especially if they don't re-sign a David West. So when you look at this contract and see that if they did go into free agency next year, let's say, and were somehow able to get a big name free agent or 2 second-tier type of decent-sized free agents, a guy like Monta Ellis could also serve you some benefit in terms of potentially a sign-and-trade type of arrangement to help balance out your books from a salary cap standpoint. I love this deal for Monta Ellis, and I really, really love this deal for the Indiana Pacers. While Ellis, I think, was maybe, frankly, worth a little bit more than what he got on the market, he still got a fairly decent deal. I think it's ridiculous that Iman Shumpert only gets $1 million less a year than Monta Ellis, who is a far, far better player than an Iman Shumpert. And that's where sometimes you pay the price for being a certain level profile type of player and getting those certain type of stigmas attached to you, especially when sometimes you do those things that make you kind of difficult to understand and make you kind of difficult to get along with. Monta Ellis should be getting something like $15-16 million a year if we look at the market of the NBA, and he's getting $11 million a year. But he's still getting a lot of guaranteed money. He's got some long-term security that at the same point in time allows him to hit the free agent market potentially again at the age of 33, which means he could get maybe one more decent-sized payday at the tail end of his career. And he's coming to a good situation. He's got a star player there in Paul George, a perfect point guard to play next to him in George Hill, who is many things that Rajon Rondo is not from a good standpoint. And Monta Ellis also is going to have the opportunity to shoot quite a bit in this system. They need his offense, and he can bring that offense, and he doesn't have to back off of that. They're paying him to be a 19-point-per-game scorer, and that's what he's going to want to be, and that's what they need him to be. And I really like this move. Like I said, it's not a home run. It's not going to make the Pacers a championship team, which make some of you wonder why you would do it. But you've got money to spend. You need to upgrade your team, and sometimes, frankly, you never know. And frankly, when you look at what he can bring to the table and the amount of money that they have put into this situation, the Pacers could have done a lot worse than the $44 million they gave Monta Ellis over the next 4 years. I mean, it was just a nice, solid move. And I wish more teams would make solid moves like this one.